Hello, welcome to another one of Mr. Lang's vlogs. Today we are going to be studying the Civil War and going over the Civil War together. Now as you can see, I'm dressed as just like it was a normal day in the classroom. Shirt, tie, vest, totally normal. Moving on. So, what we're going to be focusing on today is a lot of the basics of the Civil War. Again, just to give you guys a heads up on, kind of a good central foundation when we have been talking about the war. So first, looking at the two different sides, we have the Union and the Confederacy, again also known as the North and the South. Again, Union being the North, Confederacy being the South. And these are the two countries at war. Again, the Union soldier is going to look very different from the Confederate soldier. The Union soldier is, again, from the North, from the United States Army. So again, we're looking at troops that have already gotten uniforms, they've been an army, an established army, versus the Confederates who have to go ahead and literally make an army almost on the fly. And they do. Again, eventually they get the gray uniforms that we know of. Oftentimes in the beginning they were just wearing their, what they would wear out in the farm. Again, they would just take their own rifle right to war. So there are some advantages the North had and some disadvantages that, of course, the North had as well. We're going to talk about both. The Union had double the population, which is a huge amount when you're fighting a war. They're going to have double the amount of railroads throughout the North, and of course 5 times as many factories. Don't forget, we talked about the North was primarily industrial, so that is going to help during this, big time. The South, or the rebels, or the Confederates, they are going to be they're going to have the best generals. Let's put it that way. The Northern generals they're going to take some time before they find a decent amount of good generals, but there's definitely a lot better generals, a lot better leadership in the South. Again, defending is always easier than attacking, and we do again see that as well during this war, where the South had the advantage of, literally the North had to go into the South to take that back. The South just had to go ahead and defend their land, the land that they knew very well. And farmers are going to fight much better than factory workers for, again, obvious reasons. They've held a rifle before, they've shot a rifle. So, of course, they're going to be much better at what they do. Much better fighter. So at the start of the war, the new Confederacy took over all of these forts in the South. This new country seized all these forts that were part of the U.S. in the South. The North maintained control over one, actually technically two, but one in particular we're going to be looking at, Fort Sumter. The North maintained by continuing to send supply ships to this fort, and they continue to send supplies until the Confederates do halt a ship of supplies, and the South attacked. And because the South attacked, this began the Civil War. Now what's very interesting about that strategy is that Lincoln wanted the South to attack first. That way they felt like, the South was the aggressor. Again, and well, that's going to change even the tide of the war when we talk about how the European powers decide to not come in. Mainly because, again, technically the South started this war. But Lincoln provoked them. Let's not be, let's just put that out there too. So, again, Fort Sumter's an amazing place. If you ever get to go, I highly recommend it. It is incredible. It is incredible. Again, Robert Anderson is going to be the commanding general there. They are going to get bombarded on multiple sides. There's actually no casualty in this battle. No one actually died. Again, we did have some injuries, but no one actually died until they did the 21 cannon surrender. One of the cannons backfired, and that's technically our first casualty of the war. It's kind of crazy. So what are some of the causes of the Civil War? Well, first, the Southern states first began to leave the U.S. because of the election of Abraham Lincoln, like we talked about. The election of 1860 goes down, and they think he's going to be a tyrant. The South thought that they would have no representation at all. The economy in the South, again, they relied on slavery for its business. So again, they were defending their right to own slaves. Now, obviously, again, we know today that's horrible, that's horrendous, that's horrible, that they're defending their right to own another human being. But again, back then, that's how they thought. They thought this was their right to have a slave, and that was the backbone of their economy, and that's what they were fighting for. Again, more states start to leave the Union. Lincoln does get into office, and we have what we call the Second Secession. So the First Secession are all the states that left at the beginning, really a lot of the states from the Deep South. The Second Secession is going to be states that are primarily, a little bit more towards the border, not the border states, which we'll talk about. So when Lincoln requested 35,000 militiamen to help put down the rebelling states, we're going to have these states leave. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina are going to leave. And the reason why is because, well, Lincoln was drawing a battle line. Lincoln goes ahead and says, hey, you have to send your militiamen to serve. So that's the moment where those states had to decide whether or not they were going to be on the U.S. or part of the Confederacy. It's actually a very smart move, as really Lincoln was kind of, drawing the line, if you will. Now, I love this painting of Lincoln. It really does show what was going on in the country. The storm was a brewing. This was, Lincoln's presidency was not a cakewalk by any means. Half the country had left during his presidency. It's crazy to think how he kept it all together. What could have been going through his mind, right? Now, what's interesting is, of course, a certain amount of counties from Virginia didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay with the North. And so Lincoln does go ahead and, because they wanted to remain loyal to the Union, it creates the state of West Virginia. So that's how we have West Virginia. We don't have East Virginia. That's the ocean. Because, again, these counties did not want to leave. So in 1863, we have, in the 1860s as a whole here, 1861 all the way to 1865, we're going to have quite a divided nation, that's for sure, right? Where, again, the blue is going to represent the U.S., including the territory is also a part of the U.S. Not a lot of fighting there. There was some in New Mexico, but not a lot of fighting. The gray represents the Confederacy, and the green or the dark green for you, is the border states. Now, the border states, they are part of the Union, but they also have slavery. And so they are treated very differently, very special, because, again, Lincoln doesn't want them to leave. Especially because if you look at one of the border states, it's Maryland. And you probably know what very famous city, that's a capital of our country, is in Maryland. Again, could you even imagine if Maryland had left and gone to the Confederacy? The capital would be technically in a different country, and odds are they would have moved it. So, again, to kind of like set it all together here, the North, their advantages are 22 million people versus 9 million in the South. That's huge. 85% of the industry, again, advantage for the North. No real war materials at the beginning of the war. Again, we have railroads in the North, huge advantage, and railroads in the South, but just not as connecting. Again, didn't really connect as well because there weren't as many, wasn't as much need to. Establishing the U.S. Navy, boom, it's already established in the North. Again, it has been. Again, the South had to make a Navy, had to make an Army. And, of course, here comes the advantages of the South. And even looking at the list right now, you're thinking to yourself, the North has got this in the bag, right? Well, if you were a betting man back then, you probably would have bet against the North and thought the South had this. Again, the North just had to go, the South had to defend its land from the North taking it. So the North is fighting an offensive war, the South is fighting a defensive war. That's a huge advantage. They know their land. In some cases, this is their farmland. This is where they grew up. They know all the nooks and crannies. Again, you have no real strong military leaders in the North, not really till the end of the war, and even then, kind of debatable, versus, of course, some of the best leadership of all time. Again, that came out of West Point, was on the side of the South. And again, that's something else to note. Again, a lot of these military leaders knew each other. They'd all gone to West Point. They'd been classmates. They knew each other, essentially. It's just who could rise up into in battle, and that's we see the South clearly. They do well too. All right. Can't go through the clips, unfortunately. So Lincoln sent 35,000 troops to capture Richmond, Virginia in 1861. Thought this was going to be a quick war. Some people did. A lot of people did. Troops didn't take the war seriously, and because of that, many people expected a very easy victory, and they're not going to get that. Specifically at a place called Manassas, Virginia. The first battle, Bull Run, or first battle of Manassas, the South's going to send 35,000 troops to meet those Union troops, and when they do, the Union was in control at first at the beginning of this battle, but the issue lies with what they didn't expect. This guy. Again, Thomas Jackson, or better known as Stonewall after this battle, goes ahead and emerges from the woods, him and his men, and they go towards the Union line, and, well, as they say, there they stood. There he stood as a Stonewall. Stonewall Jackson. They couldn't break the line. The Confederates win this battle, and of course, really sets the tone of this war, that maybe it's not going to be as easy as everyone thought it was going to be. Now, one of the most interesting things about this battle, of course, is that there was a picnic. It's a picnic. People picnicked out. They were like, hey, let's go ahead and have a picnic and watch this battle. And then, of course, that was the last time that happened because people realized it was a lot of carnage. A lot of carnage. So people even brought their own guns. So to give you an idea, there's the tree line right there. Again, where you can see where they would have gone from, where Jackson's men would have emerged. Again, and, well, held like a stone wall. It's very interesting stuff there. So you got the Union line, Confederate line. All right, so Lincoln's war plan was pretty simple, and it's also known as the Anaconda plan. Just like an anaconda, he's going to go ahead and surround the South. Again, he's going to capture Richmond, the capital, and he's going to set up a naval blockade. Now, that naval blockade is going to go along the coast, the East Coast, and it's going to literally stop any ship going in and out of this country. And, well, sorry, out of the Confederates, of the Confederacy. He's going to control the Mississippi River. Again, not only would that split the Confederacy in half, but also at the same time, it would go ahead and allow us a lot more, ways to, deliver troops, supplies, and so on. And of course, cotton. Lots of cotton. Because cotton is huge. That's going to be a moneymaker for, again, the South. If we cut their supply off of that, then that's something that, well, that's going to hurt them big time. All right, and we get the Southern War Plan. It's going to seem similar. Take D.C., obviously. Take the capital. Move the army into Maryland and Pennsylvania. They wanted to move the army and go on to the offensive. Again, a lot of them didn't know that land as well, for the most part. Again, they did want to go ahead and put pressure on the North so they would surrender. And, of course, gain European support. Something we don't, almost happened. The Confederacy almost got Great Britain to join in, but it didn't happen. And, thank goodness, because, again, if it had happened, this war could have gone very differently. It really could have. All right, so what are some of the Northern generals? Well, we're going to have, North had, like I said, a hard time finding good generals. They're going to go over 5 generals in 1 year. You got, young Napoleon here, George B. McClellan. He's very cautious. He's going to be relieved of duty. Again, probably one of the best on here because you also have Hooker up there. You have Burnside, yes. I think Sideburns. That's the guy right there. I mean, look at those. Look at those mutton chops. Huh? Look at them. Wait, did it? There you go, over there. And then, of course, almost right behind me, there it is of course General Meade, who's going to be at Gettysburg. He's going to lead the troops there on the Union side. Again, Southern generals, we have way more experienced generals and some actually incredible leadership when it comes to and tacticians and strategists as well. You have Joe Johnson. You're going to have Robert E. Lee, probably the most famous, and in some cases one of the luckiest, and of course James Longstreet, someone who I think is an incredible general and doesn't get as much, praise, considering he very much was for equality of African Americans in a time when, again, being in the Confederacy, that was not something. So we also have the Ironclads, again, the Battle of Hampton Roads, they call it, which ironically does not happen anywhere near Rhodes. It happens out in the ocean, between the Merrimack and the Monitor. 2 of these big iron ships that cannonballs are just going to bing, 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 just not even make it, not even sink them. Essentially what the Confederacy wanted to do was break through the blockade that I talked about, the naval blockade. And this essentially results in a tie, because neither side could break through or inflict a lot of damage. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a weird battle. Battle of Seven Pines, real quick with this one. Again, Joe Johnson's, that's really the big thing in this battle. Joe Johnson's wounded, so Robert E. Lee does take command of the Confederate Army. Of course, we all know it's going to be a huge part of this war. The Battle of Shiloh, the Union Army is taken by surprise. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, very famous, is going to be here. When Grant is here, it's going to be crazy, because although the Union wins, Grant tends to sometimes be considered a butcher by sending a lot of young men into battle, and just that was how he used this. That's how he won this battle. It's because we lost a lot of men. It was a very bloody battle, and as crazy as it sounds, it was the bloodiest battle until, again, we get into another battle, Antietam. So again, there's Shiloh there. And of course, Antietam, that is the bloodiest day in the war, bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 casualties in less than a day. McClellan refused to pursue the South after during this battle, and that's why he gets replaced. He gets replaced by General Burnside, and the reason why is because General Burnside actually did an incredible job during this battle. Again, right on the bottom is the Burnside Bridge, they call it, because of course he held Longstreet, Longstreet was up on that hill, up along this hill here. Burnside was right here with his men and defeated Longstreet, which again, if you know anything about tactics in war, Longstreet had not only the high ground, but this is a bridge, so it's a narrow way that the Northerners had to go through. Burnside did a fantastic job. Then you have Dunkirk Church, which is right up there. That's where Stonewall Jackson was for the majority of the war. That's where he did a lot of his, essentially his strategy, his strategy and tactics from there. And then of course you get the famous cornfield up top, where again it was just one of the worst parts of this battle. All right, so there you go. As we go through Antietam here. Sorry, I can't show the clips, but all right. Then we have Fredericksburg. So now Burnside is in charge of the Northern troops, and he's doing a horrible job. He sent his men to an open plain. They had to go ahead and actually go across the river. They did these pontoons. You can see right here. Those pontoons are like floating bridges, essentially. They were doing that while they had Confederate snipers all in the city, as you can see in the top picture, just picking them off. Lee easily defeated the North here. And of course, Burnside's going to be replaced by Hooker. Now, Hooker, and this is again some photos, again, I've been there as well. So you can see, even when they went ahead through the battle, and they crossed the river, even when they went towards the city, they did city fighting through the city, and then they still opened up in a big open field with a hill, and then the hill is where Longstreet's men were, right in Mary's Heights, and just was like, oh my goodness, just slaughtering them. So Hooker's in charge now. He's in Chancellorsville. It's another defeat for the North. Things are not looking too good right here with the North. They had low morale. The only thing that really kind of saved them in this particular battle is that, believe it or not, Stonewall Jackson does a reconnaissance mission. At night, a recon meeting, he's kind of seeing where the troops are. He goes back towards the line, his own line, and his own troops fired on him. Yeah, he died of friendly fire, believe it or not. Stonewall Jackson. When he does die, he does actually, first he got shot and it gets infected, essentially, even after they amputated his arm. It lasted about a week after the events. So the North felt that defeat would come soon, like, pack it up, boys. It was just not going to happen. Now, Chancellorsville is in like this really dark woods. Again, I've been there too, and it's very, very thick woods. So it's very easy to see how, of course, the South's greatest loss, again, Stonewall Jackson does go ahead and pass. Now, Stonewall Jackson, this is the last thing he saw. This is a shrine that's still down there today. He was in that bed when he passed. That was with the exact blankets. You're hearing the exact clock tick right there, still running. That was from that day as well. The room is mostly set up on how it was when he passed. The South really likes him. He's also buried in another place, because after they amputated his arm, someone who had a farm nearby said, oh man, I'm going to take his arm. They took his arm and carried it and buried it, and that's where that little stone is right there. That's just the arm of Stonewall Jackson is buried there. So he's technically buried in two places. Technically. Alright, so the Battle of Vicksburg goes on July 4th, 1863, the same time of Gettysburg, so it doesn't get as much recognition. Of course, it is a Northern victory, but of course it is probably such a huge part, and yet it just doesn't get the love because of Gettysburg. Again, we control, because of Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, we control the Mississippi River, and of course, that's a huge part of this. And then we're going to end on Gettysburg today. Gettysburg was pretty simple when it came to the plan. Lee wanted to invade the North, and Gettysburg is in Pennsylvania. That's part of the North. So he hoped to capture another northern city, convince the North to seek peace and end this war in 1863. He desperately needed supplies, so he stopped in the little town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, about 2,000 people. He did not know, and nor did the North know, that they were both there. In fact, the North was looking for Lee's army. They just didn't know where he was. Yet it's going to be Reynolds that's going to spot him. Reynolds' men that's going to spot him over the hill, and go, oh well, there they are, found him. George Meade is our new leader here of the army. 90,000 troops are what the Union has, versus of course the Confederacy, which the Confederacy, again, Robert E. Lee is going to be in charge here. He's going to have 75,000 troops. Again, probably the most famous person under him during this battle is General Pickett. Although, arguably, again, Longstreet is huge in this battle. So, Lee's plan is pretty simple. Weaken the flanks, which he does on day 1 and day 2, and attack the center of the line. You're going to see these in the battle maps as well. I like to put this up. This is a regiment from the area. So this is, these guys are from Milford, Marlborough, Stoughton. So, again, from the Massachusetts area that was there. That's a memorial to them, which is cool at Gettysburg. It's a great place if you ever get to go. So, probably the most famous thing that comes out of this whole mess that is Gettysburg is Pickett's charge. On the 3rd day of the battle, Lee orders an all-out attack to go through the center of the Union line, really in an open field. Longstreet says don't do it, yet he does it. Lee does it. And Pickett really was too proud. He really wanted to get his name in the history books. Well, he did, unfortunately. He leads 15,000 Confederate troops literally to their death across a low ground separating the two forces. Now, they call this the high tide of the Confederacy because this is literally not only the last chance the Confederacy had to win the war, but the northernmost point they reached during the war. Okay? Of course, very famous, what Pickett says, General Lee, I have no division now. They are slaughtered as they head towards the Union line. And, well, half were killed by cannon fire, canisters of bullets from tugging Union troops. They were running a little bit low on ammo with cannonballs. They would take nails, stuff it in a can, shoot it out during specifically Pickett's charge as well. Of most of the men that actually reached the ridge, they're going to be captured, they're going to be killed. Gettysburg is a Union victory. To kind of quickly go over it, again, the day 1 fighting literally was, as you can sort of see, the red is the Confederacy, the blue is the Union troops. You can see again how the Confederacy was, going right around and pushed the Union back. It definitely was a Confederate victory this day, as it pushed the Union back to what they call the fish hook. So you can see the fish hook there. On day 2, it's probably the bloodiest day. They are going to go ahead and squish the Union all together. And of course, this is where we see that on day 3, he really could have. If Lee, he really thought he could have just went right through the line there, right through the center of the line. So nevertheless, here are some of the photos from back then and now. And again, this is from the other side of the battlefield there. And then, of course, on day 3 is the famous Pickett's charge. So you see right where Pickett was supposed to go right through, cut the Union line in half. It did not happen that way, though. And, of course, the Union holds out. They hold out. Okay, the dead is staggering. Let me get out of the way. You're going to have, altogether, 51,644 killed. That's crazy. That's crazy. Over 3 days, period. And this is really the turning point. Gettysburg is the turning point of this war. It's the largest battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, and, well, it's the last time they go ahead and do it. They get to that point. And, of course, it leads to the most famous speech we'll be talking about soon, the Gettysburg Address. Such a famous speech. Speech given by Lincoln as a result of the Battle of Gettysburg. Happens again months later. The battle happens in July. The cemetery opens in November. The town of Gettysburg is completely ravaged. The army moves on. They leave 21,000 wounded in a town of 2,000. They're wounded everywhere. They buried everybody as quickly as they could in shallow graves and flower beds. They'd have to wear masks because the smell was so bad. Again, it's summer. It was a horrible, horrible time. All right, and I hope you're having a great time. I hope you guys are good, and I'll see you in class. All right. Goodbye.